What do you think about Paul McCartney?
I always thought he had great talent. I was accused of being anti-Paul and pro-John. I think John was many things: a poet, a writer, a thinker, peace activist, a musician. I think Paul was just a very, very talented songwriter. But I did talk to him eventually on the phone for a while when I was doing the John Lennon book, and he did help me on it. And when I talked to him on the phone, I started to realise, because I wasn't talking to him like a journalist, I was just talking to him like another person, I began to feel I sort of knew why John would want to be around this person, this quality he had of, great enthusiasm for the music mainly. But then I found out, I became friendly with Neil Aspinall, who was really, the fifth Beatle, who was, he used to be their driver, and then he became much more than that, and he was like their sort of fixer for everything, and then he ran the Apple company for several years. Just after he left the Apple organisation, he was diagnosed with cancer, and Paul McCartney paid the bills. I think, that means he is a great guy.
Yeah, he seems to come across like a great guy now. But how come the history hasn't been so kind to him?
Because people thought he was too plausible, he was giving the thumbs up sign and, pretending to be boyishly enthusiastic, and, I changed my opinion of Mick a lot in the book on Mick, and in McCartney too, in the book on Lennon, and he has basically stayed, although controlling and a niggling perfectionist, and perhaps not the composer he was years ago, essentially a decent human being.
And George Harrison?
I think he was a pretty sour character, actually. There was that enormous two-part interview with Harrison. All sorts of claims were made for him about, being as great as John and Paul, but I don't think he was. He was someone who worked out how to play the guitar licks, which they needed. And because he was then around two genius songwriters for so many years, I think some of the genius kind of rubbed off on him, and he did write some songs that were very good. But once he wasn't around them anymore, then there were no more of those good songs.
No, he did write, that's true, he did write mediocre songs.
And it was just being around two brilliant songwriters, he picked some of it up.
Do you think the Beatles would have come together when John was still alive? Would they have reunited before, because of Live Aid?
They would have, no, before that. In the 70s, somebody offered them a lot of money, and John was quite happy, was willing, because of the money involved, but the negotiations broke down about film rights and subsidiary rights and things like that. It didn't happen.
When was it?
Early in the 1970s.
And so you think they would have...
Oh, well, John was always said to be the one who didn't want to do it, but he seemed to be quite happy at that point.
Yeah?
Yeah. Just for the money.
For the money.
Mm.
Do you think, because there are some certain meetings that Paul McCartney visited John Lennon in a Dakota, and that, people were around. I mean, what's his name called? Spitz? I don't know, what is it? A friend of John Lennon called Spitz. I don't know what's his name. Okay. But that they said, they were growing apart even more at the end of the 70s than they were at the end of the 60s.
I don't think so. They never actually had a row, and it was never a stand-up row between them. It was more like sort of people in front of a marriage counsellor, complaining about the other. And no, McCartney would go to the Dakota building and they watched TV and things like that. They were sort of reconciled. They were older, they were wiser. They could see that, there was no point in holding these grudges and things.
And what did John Lennon admire? And because, he actually stated that he liked to be more of a rock and roller, John Lennon.
Except that, Paul was a good rock and roller, and John could write a very sentimental ballad. That was more a case of a symbiosis between two people, that one could become the other. John could write a sentimental ballad, and Paul could write a rock and roll song.
And Ringo Starr, is he a smart guy?
I think if he were a smart guy, he wouldn't be nasty to his fans. You know, he's just said, I'm not bothering with the fans anymore, you know.
No?
Yeah.
So he's nice. So he isn't smart.
That's not smart, no.
Last questions about persons. Mick Taylor. He didn't look, well, it seems he doesn't really look back fondly on his time with the Stones.
No, I mean, it was sort of it wrecked him, really. He was, you know, he sort of took on their lifestyle and just escaped with his life, I think.
And Ron Wood?
Well, he's a rock and roll creature, you know. Never going to grow up. Eternal teenager.
He seemed like the little brother of Keith Richards.
Yeah, like but a nice guy. Not hugely talented, I don't think, but